Joining us right now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, National Fantasy Sports host, analyst, writer for Sportsnet. You can also hear him on Sportsnet 590, The Fan, up there in Toronto. And make sure you follow him on Twitter at AndyMC81 because he gives you daily analysis of the NFL and the fantasy sports scene. And he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline here on 97.3 ESPN. Andy, how you doing on this Friday?
Josh, I'm good, brother. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm glad for you to jump back on because it feels like, you know what, this Cowboys versus Eagles debate just doesn't seem to go away, man. And the latest is we got these roster rankings. So in these roster rankings, it's the Cowboys are the 6th best roster and the Eagles are the 9th best roster. My first initial question is, do you believe that the Eagles and the Cowboys are both top 10 NFL rosters?
Ooh, now that's, you know what? I think if we look at it, it seems like a bit of a stretch. Like, it's not outrageous, but if I'm just thinking off the top of my head, do I think the Eagles and Cowboys are top 10? I probably want to drop them a little bit lower, like just under the top 10 probably. That's kind of my gut feel. But then when you start looking really at the rosters, if we begin with the Cowboys, and on offense especially, like, good Lord, like they are absolutely loaded. So it all comes down to in that article, it's, you know, the underlying numbers, the analytics, and it depends how much you consider that and everything, right? But if I'm looking at, that seems a little bit high maybe for both teams, but certainly, hey, if it's true, it makes the NFC East a whole lot more interesting this year.
It definitely does. And I think one of the things I have an issue, because to me, I feel like there's a lot smaller of a gap between the two than maybe some other people think. And part of the reason I think that is because you mentioned on offense, I firmly believe, and it's not something that's sexy to talk about, but you go from having one of the best centers in the NFL in Travis Frederick to a rookie. And I get he's a rookie from Wisconsin, but he's still a rookie, and there's got to be some chemistry issues and questions since there's no OTAs, no minicamps, and we're going, as we anticipate, right in the training camp. It's like, all right, man, go in there. Good luck.
And that's the issue, right? That's the issue. It is the cohesion. And in this year where, yeah, you're right, we're doing virtual camps, virtual training. All right, there's no mini camps. Who knows how much, if any, preseason? We already had the Hall of Fame game canceled. So that offensive line is so crucial for both, really any team with a half-decent quarterback. But for these two teams specifically, you want to keep Carson Wentz upright and healthy. Got to keep that O-line sturdy. And for the Cowboys, how much of their success has been based off of a solid offensive line? When you have Zeke Elliott, when you want to give Dak time and allow him to roll out as well. So missing that one key piece in the center. Now, less important than, let's say, if you're going in with a brand new left tackle, but still, if that middle of the line collapses, it could be disastrous.
Now, you mentioned the quarterbacks. So I'll ask you again, which do you prefer? Do you value the quarterback who has the higher ceiling like Wentz, or do you prefer the quarterback who's always available like Dak Prescott?
And, Josh, I try to usually my mind first goes to the fantasy football side of things, right? So if I'm looking at it from that perspective, you can't discount Dak Prescott was the second best quarterback in fantasy football last year. Second best. You could have gone for nothing or a late round pick last year. So that's something. But if I'm taking it from a real-life football perspective, if I'm starting a team and they tell me, okay, you can have Carson Wentz, you can have Dak Prescott, I'm taking Carson Wentz immediately. I'm not thinking twice about it. But the way the team's built, I mean, both can have success, but you have Dak in with the weapons around him. It takes so much pressure off of him. You get in trouble, you got a beast like Zeke. Okay, Zeke, there you go, pal. Go for it. Now you have you're just the offense. You had CeeDee Lamb to Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup. That's ridiculous. Now, you don't have the tight end. Blake Jarwin's a guy right now. But I think it's easier for Dak Prescott to do well with what's around him compared to Carson Wentz, where he still has a lot on him because of the injury and age history of Deshaun Jackson and Alshon Jeffrey. And really, let's face it, the Eagles, that offense, it's running through Miles Sanders, and it's going through the tight ends, Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. You just have a lot of question marks at wide receiver.
Now, you just led me to another point, which is the running backs. we all know that Ezekiel Elliott has been one of the best running backs in the NFL, whether you're looking at it from a pure football perspective or a fantasy football perspective. But the one thing that Miles Sanders gives you, he was the Eagles' third best receiver last year. I would argue that Sanders is the better receiving weapon than Elliott is, but Elliott is obviously one of the 3-4 best pure runners in the league. So what do you value more? Do you value the guy who can run and catch, or do you guy who's a better runner and sometimes catches the ball?
I think when you look at if we're going to what is more valuable on the Eagles, I think it's Miles Sanders' skill set. Now, Elliott can still catch the ball. 54 balls last year, 77 the year before. But you're right, the more natural pass catcher is Miles Sanders. And what I like about this is he proved that as the season went on, dude can carry the load, right? He can be the guy to carry it and take it, and you can keep him on the field. And what's so dangerous, of course, about a guy who can catch and run, it helps keep defenses honest. You can stack the box, but Sanders can zip out to the side, and Wentz just slings it over to him. So you have that little bit of a question mark. And I love running backs who defenses cannot be predictable. Some guys you put in, the dude's running, and you just stack it up if you want. Or conversely to that, he's going to catch it, and you can plan that way. Miles Sanders gives you truly both. And if we dip into the fantasy side of it, I love him as a RB1 this year, because you look at the people behind him. No one's busting down the door for Boston Scott, Corey Clement, or Elijah Holyfield. It's a case where in a season where, especially like Josh, you go into this year, you look at how many running back committees are there. It's almost endless. So if we're talking Philly and Dallas, you got two of the very few true RB1s for your fantasy team. And in real life football, of course, they're pretty damn good too.
Absolutely. Andy McNamara joining us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure you're following him on Twitter at AndyMC81. All right, Andy, let's flip it over to the defense, because I think we've talked a lot of offense. I think, to me, what is the more of the preference between the Eagles and the Cowboys? Because I think that most people would agree the Cowboys have two of the best linebackers in the NFL, but there's questions in their secondary. The Eagles have probably one of the most mediocre groups of linebackers in the league. They have some questions secondary, but they have Darius Slay. So, and I think that most people would agree that the defensive lines are both good. So how do we compare and contrast these two defenses?
We've seen over the past couple of years, in some defenses, a devaluing of the linebacker position because of more athletic safeties and just the creativity that defensive coordinators are using safeties in. You have hybrids. You have guys that can drop back. You can come in, and like we talked about against running backs, you can stack the box. You can have thumpers in between. So depending on how these teams want to utilize their linebackers compared to safeties and depth, and sometimes you have a guy who might be a backup safety, but boy, you know what? You can pop them in certain situations, in certain formations, and you don't necessarily need that elite linebacker. There's a salary cap, folks, right? You got to, at some point, not pay. You can't pay stars all across the board. So I like how both teams are set up, and especially, I think for the Eagles, where their strength is really in along the lines of scrimmage on offense and defense, right? And if you start there, you kind of build out. And if you start there for both teams, I think you're looking really good, and you drop back. I'd say the Cowboys are probably, in my opinion, more improved from last year. But if I'm going to take one defense, I think it's close, but I'm probably taking the Eagles. Even with the linebacking crew not being that necessarily going to blow you away, I still like the overall core of that.
The other question I have about the Cowboys is, what does it say about their secondary that they're depending on a rookie in Trayvon Diggs? They're depending on a free agent in Clinton Dix that apparently he can't stay in one spot for more than a year and change. And compare that to the Eagles, where I can guarantee you that Darius Slay is the best corner. And I know there's questions about Rodney McLeod's availability times, but he is still a quality safety. Yeah.
And there's always that danger when you rely on a rookie. And I love Trayvon Diggs coming out of the draft. I think that was a great pickup for the Cowboys. But again, we talk about this unique year. You don't have camps. How much can you learn from virtual? These are questions fans don't know. It differs team to team. How bought in are players? Right? Like, these are all questions we don't know. So this year, you're relying on that right side for a rookie to come in. You hope he's doing the work. You hope the message is getting there clear. We don't know. And you're right. Clinton Dix, he moves around a lot. I still like Xavier Woods overall. It's a case where it's tough to project because we're not going to know until they hit the field. And it might be a case too, Josh, where, hey, Trevon Diggs turns out to be really good, but maybe he doesn't hit his stride until week 6. And what happens then if teams are able to exploit that side? We know quarterbacks and offensive coordinators. You find a weakness, you keep going at it. So if that's the case, that's a real weakness compared to when you go to the Eagles, who have a bit more of an established secondary.
And let's flip it over to the coaches. Mike McCarthy, he's a name. New D coordinator, yep. Mike Nolan, he's a name. But my question is, how good can those guys be in an environment where they've had no mini camps, no OTAs, or as Doug Pederson calls it, no grass time, right? So, what do we think of two coaches? We know their pedigree, but how long can it take for them to really get that team to play the way they want it to?
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, because the clear advantage goes to stability and continuity, which goes to Doug Pederson and the Eagles. It just does. Defenses, offenses, special teams, they know their role. They know how things are to be done. Now, there's new players in, but you have veterans on that team that can guide people. Hey, this is how we do it. It's going to be a much easier transition, especially since supposedly we can't point to what Mike McCarthy's offense is going to do, because according to him in his interview and his press spiel and all that, this is a revamped, analytics-focused offense. He has freshened and modernized up his playbook from Green Bay. So supposedly it's not going to look like anything close to the Green Bay side of things. Is that good? Is that bad? We don't know. Now, the one thing we see with Dallas, though, especially on offense, very loaded with talent. So this is a case where maybe, at least early on, it's a simplification of it. It's okay. Now, if Mike McCarthy's smart, and I hate, Josh, I hate in any sport when coaches come in and say, oh, it's about my system and players to fit. You work to the strengths. And I hope Mike McCarthy does that for the Dallas Cowboys' sake, because you can simplify it and let your playmakers go. CeeDee Lamb was my top-ranked wide receiver coming out of this draft. The guy's an absolute monster. Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, pick your poison. Zeke Elliott. You can't load up to stop the run. You can't fade away because Elliott will get you. You have 3 guys lined up. Like, it's a case where I wonder if Mike McCarthy tries to get too cute. You can overcomplicate things and try to get too creative, where sometimes the most simpler answer is, hey, you know what? Do a quick little slant, get the ball into your playmaker's hands and go. But overall, you got to give the edge coaching-wise and just overall continuity-wise to the Philadelphia Eagles, because they know what Doug Pederson's about.
Now, speaking of Doug Pederson, I think we forget the fact that it's not 1, not 2, but 3 straight years the Eagles have been in the playoffs despite basically a million injuries plus 1.
Yeah.
So what does it say about Doug Pederson as an NFL head coach that he's finding ways to win with Wentz or Foles or a secondary that can't stop you and me, or whatever the situation may be? This team still finds a way to get to the postseason.
Well, and what about the decimated wide receiver core? End of the year, Greg Ward Jr. was making it on the DFS fantasy rosters. I was slotting Greg Ward Jr. in as a value play.
He was a great value play.
It was a great value play. But that's how crazy things got, and that's to the credit of Doug Pederson, because if you can do that, if you can make with all the injuries, and that's why I was disappointed that they didn't further upgrade the wide receiver group, in my opinion, with Jackson and Jeffrey, all the injuries and all that, you're still wondering, okay, what if they can do 1 year, maybe this year, where you get lucky with help? You've been unlucky for a while. What if you get lucky and you have the coaching job that Doug Pederson was able to do? Now you're talking about something potentially really special. Because if you're able to do that with all those injuries and the secondary banged up, receiver, all that, you get everything clicking. Like, that's a good-looking group on paper. And I'm the most excited on this offense I'm excited about is the tight end group, how they're going to utilize Ertz and Goddard again, another step forward, and Miles Sanders. Because I really think you can build out from there. And if you can take the pressure off of what Wentz has to do with the wide receivers and add another layer to what you can do with the running backs and tight end, if you get lucky with some wide receiver help, that's going to open this thing way up.
Andy, before I let you go, if I can just shift gears a little bit on you. I know up there with Sportsnet, you guys are very heavy in the Toronto sports scene. I got to ask you, though, what is the perspective and the mood up there, considering that, you have both the Blue Jays and the Raptors, two teams that one team is trying to make a playoff run, and the Raptors, the other team is trying to start their season, but yet they got to get out of Canada to play everybody else, and there's a lot of issues with logistics and everything going on here. So what is the mood and perspective for you guys up there?
Well, the latest is, on the baseball side, is the ownership group in Major League Baseball has petitioned the Canadian government to try to let the Blue Jays play their games in Toronto. Because in Rogers Centre, formerly Skydome, there is a hotel built in. So you have, for incoming teams, a potential self-made bubble. Airport, hotel, boom, you're in the stadium. You don't have to go outside, which is nice. So they're petitioning that. There's no final word on that. That should hopefully come down. It's going to have to come down pretty soon with how fast they went spring trading. So over the next few days, hopefully. If not, there's two other game plans is Dunedin, Florida, but we know the case in Florida. My gosh, I think it was just under 9,000 today. Mm-hmm. The other that just started to come up, and again, these are all, it's logistics, where do you put people, et cetera. But Buffalo, because the Blue Jays farm team, AAA team, the Buffalo Bisons play there. So there's a few different options. Both Toronto teams would love to play their games in Toronto. Of course, in NBA, they're all going to the Walt Disney World bubble down there. But for baseball, it's okay. If you can't do it, they at least have some options. I just wonder, with the borders and all that, even if the governments waive it and say, okay, hey, you can come in, you don't have to quarantine, like, what if infections go back and forth? Like, there's just so many. It's kind of like a magician with the scarf coming out of the sleeve, Josh, right? Like, with one question, there's like three other questions that come out. You can keep pulling and pulling and pulling and go down a rabbit hole until you drive yourself nuts as far as a what if. But fingers crossed, at least, if we can get these things started, hopefully they can get contained and sort itself out, and at least to get going.
He's Andy McNamara. Follow him on Twitter at AndyMC81 for all your NFL fantasy sports information. Andy, as soon as sports actually start back up, I'm sure we'll be touching base again because, like I said, you're all over that Toronto scene up there on Sportsnet. I appreciate the time as always, my friend.
Oh, Josh, anytime you want, happy to come on with you, man. Talk to you soon.